Keto has returned with a little bit of a different feel, a little bit of a different name. Where did keto go? And what's different about it now that it's back? Well, let's talk about newer research that's really been coming out and showing us how much more benefit we can get if we really apply what we've learned in the research. So let's jump right in. Okay, the first thing that's majorly different, outside of a therapeutic ketogenic diet, we're now looking at keto being more like 30 to 50% protein, whereas it used to be more like 20 to 30% protein. Okay, and now we're looking more like 40 to 60% fats versus 70% fats. And we're still looking at the general 5 to 10% carbohydrates. Now in this video, I'm gonna get more nuancy with different things that you can follow and how you can really implement this, but this is the basic macronutrient scale that we're at with keto now. We used to think that, well, keto, you need to keep fat super high and protein super low to create ketones. Well, now the evidence suggests that producing the ketones aren't necessarily the major goal. Producing ketones with high fat, low protein is really great for a lot of therapeutic use cases and for the modulation of inflammation and things like that. But when we're looking at it as a general lifestyle that's sustainable, the evidence is starting to point towards, well, maybe keep the protein a little bit higher. It's better for longevity, it's better for your muscle mass, it's better for your performance. Anyhow, we'll break it down more. The first major shift comes from a study published in the Journal of Medicinal Food. Now, it puts subjects on what they called a Spanish Mediterranean ketogenic diet. Sounds kind of cool. Okay, well, what's different about that is they really focused on fats coming from olive oil. They focused on higher amounts of protein, in this case, coming from poultry, coming from lots of eggs, okay? Before, eggs were kind of the, the ugly stepchild of the ketogenic diet. Like, people focused on meat and cheese, but eggs are really important in this more Mediterranean feel that we're going for. And good news for people that like cheese, there was a lot of dairy, a lot of cream, a lot of half and half, a lot of aged cheeses, a lot of yogurt, cottage cheese, things that were, again, kind of thrown under the bus saying, hey, limit dairy with keto, but now we're seeing more of it. But let's talk about the huge results these subjects had. Okay, the general weight loss went from 242 pounds to 209 pounds. Huge weight loss. On average, LDL cholesterol dropped 23 points. Now, the reason this is important is because a lot of times when people do keto, they see their LDL climb up, and it's not necessarily bad, but there's this constant justification and constant explaining of it. In this particular case, we're killing two birds with one stone. We're dropping our LDL and we're enjoying our keto diet and not having to justify and defend all the time. The ALT, the liver enzymes, went from 71 down to 23. That is a huge improvement in the overall just stress on the liver. And then when we look at the data, we see that 21% or more of the people that were doing this form of diet ended up having a full regression of their fatty liver disease. Okay, and over 90% had a reduction in their fatty liver. No surprise with that much weight loss, but that's huge. Okay, we do know from some evidence that excess carbohydrates might contribute to triglycerides forming in the liver, so this makes sense. But speaking of triglycerides, triglyceride content went down from 232 all the way down to 111. That is huge. That is cutting it in half. Okay, again, no surprise. When we reduce carbohydrates, triglycerides tend to go down, but not necessarily to this degree. So let's break down a little bit more. Now we know, okay, this is kind of how we want to do our keto diet. We want to do more eggs, a little more dairy, more poultry, some red meat. We want to focus on the olive oils, the macadamia nut oils, things like that. But what's next? Well, with this, we dive into a study that was published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, and it was an 18-month study. Okay, it was interesting because it looked at the polyphenol content of two different kinds of Mediterranean low-carb diets. Okay, the first one had 420 added milligrams of polyphenols coming from walnuts. The second intervention group had 1,240 additional polyphenols coming in, this time from green tea and from various greens. So they wanted to see who had better results, lower polyphenols or higher polyphenols with a low-carb keto Mediterranean diet. In this case, they looked specifically at brain atrophy. There was a difference in 3.1% brain atrophy and 1.2% brain atrophy based upon the polyphenol content. The group that had more polyphenols had less brain atrophy. This is important if you're aging. The brain will always kind of atrophy as we age, but if we can restrict that aging a little bit by adding more polyphenols in our ketogenic diet, we're having a huge win here. So what does this suggest from a very practical side of things? Well, for one, it means adding the vegetables in is very important, and don't be so concerned about the fiber, don't be so concerned about the carbohydrates coming from the veggies, because the polyphenols are at least going to add the benefit. But where I go with this is small amount of carbs that come from maybe berries and fruit might be okay to add in. The polyphenols and the flavonols that we get from the fruit are going to give us more of a benefit than what we lose by having a few extra carbs. So this is starting to suggest the polyphenols are very, very, very important to the efficacy of a ketogenic diet and to preventing that neuroinflammation. One of the reasons people feel so good on a low-carb diet is the modulation of inflammation in the brain. Adding these polyphenols in, we're seeing there's less neuroinflammation, which means not only can you feel better, but you can protect your brain better too. Now, number 3, and this is really interesting, we're starting to see a lot more adding of organ meat into successful low-carb diets. Now, I've always kind of talked about organ meat, but now it's a lot more top of mind. Okay, we're talking about adding in maybe 100 grams, a couple ounces of liver 2 or 3 times per week. Why? The vitamin A content is going to help support vitamin D, so all these different productions and these sort of like coexisting relationships there are very, very important. Now, additionally, the B12 content. Vitamin B12 is a micronutrient deficiency that people face on the ketogenic diet a lot because they don't eat enough veggies and they don't really get it, right? If you get some liver in, that solves the problem. Same kind of thing with adding some spleen in. Okay, then you're getting a lot of heme iron, and with the liver, you're getting significant amounts of copper. When you start increasing your meat consumption and your iron consumption, you need to have copper because copper drives the actual process of iron doing its job. Okay, iron being able to get into its active form is governed by copper. So we can't get all this just from veggies because that's sort of a form of iron, a non-heme iron that's really not doing us a whole lot of good because the conversion to a usable form isn't that high. So if we get it from things like liver or even a supplement that contains liver, then that's a huge win. So that's a huge push we're starting to see even in Mediterranean style keto. Just a small amount of liver, small amount of spleen, small amount of organ meat to supplement your veggies and your other food. If you want to try some really good quality grass-fed, grass-finished meat, like some ribeyes, some New York steaks, some fillets, they've got flank steaks, they've got all kinds of stuff. That link is down below. It gets delivered right to your doorstep, and they've really built their name on having good quality grass-fed and grass-finished beef. But then as they've grown, now they have chicken, so they have chicken wings, they have also fish options like cod, they have sockeye salmon, that's the really deep red sockeye salmon that you want that has that astaxanthin in it. So anyway, like if you're doing keto, I highly recommend ButcherBox because it just makes life easy. That way it just gets shipped to your doorstep, put it in the freezer, you forget about it, and it's easy said, one and done. That's it, okay? So that link is down below so you can check out ButcherBox. Again, highly, highly recommend it if you're doing keto. The next one, we're seeing the rise again of the egg, the incredible edible egg. Now, I talked about it in the beginning. The eggs are great, and we saw those in that initial study. But now we're starting to see that eggs are really powerful for the brain. So having something that's higher fat, like steak and eggs in the morning, is actually going to be good. That's where you want to allocate most of your fats. Okay, so most of your fats in the morning because from a genetic standpoint, circadian gene standpoint, you can actually get away with more fat in the morning without storing it than you can in the evening. But there was a study published in Journal Nutritional Sciences that took a look at people that were just eating small amounts of eggs and large amounts of eggs. And in a very simple form, the lesser the amount of eggs that people consumed on average, the higher the cognitive decline. People that ate more eggs had less cognitive decline. So long term, these eggs are protecting the brain. But what about in a short-term situation? Well, with that, we look at a study published in Current Developments. Took a look at subjects eating whole eggs, egg whites, egg yolks, yogurt, or fasted. The subjects that consumed egg yolks and whole eggs had better memory and better attention/processing in the short term. Okay, better than egg whites, better than yogurt. It's the choline and the lutein that's in the eggs that really seems to be the powerful brain benefit there. So again, people do keto low carb because it makes their brain feel great. You may want to consider adding eggs in the morning. Okay, again, that concentration of calories in the morning. And that's the next thing I want to mention. We should be allocating most of our calories towards the morning with keto. Why? Because the most of our calories are going to come from fats in the first place, okay? So in order to get more fats and more calories in, We should be consuming them in the morning when we have less risk of storing them, less risk of what is called lipotoxicity. Now, regardless of what kind of fat it is that you're consuming, too much fat at one time can be toxic. It's called lipotoxicity. It's just like too much sugar at one time can be toxic. Why? Because your body has to deal with fats just like it has to deal with carbs. You have a greater ability to deal with fats in the morning than you do in the afternoon. So just keep that in mind. Now the next one, number 6, is one that we talked about earlier on, but it's very, very important now. Aim for 50 to 60% of your calories from protein. I know it sounds crazy, but this is really where we are at. We're not chasing the ketone value anymore, we're chasing the protein. There was a study published in Diabetes that took a look at subjects that ate even a 30% protein diet that was not ketogenic, and they saw improvements across almost all metabolic markers, including their ability to handle glucose, their insulin resistance, things like that. Now, some people do keto because they want it to be a lifestyle forever. Some people do keto as an intervention. But most of the people that are doing keto that have immense success are people that need to lose weight or people that are diabetic or insulin resistant, okay? Most people that are diabetic or insulin resistant, they want to go back to a somewhat normal life at some point. They want to be able to enjoy some carbs again at some point in the future. And with this, you need to be able to train your body to become insulin sensitive again, so that if you do have carbs, you don't go skyrocket your blood sugar and feel like garbage. So what we're seeing is that higher levels of protein are going to allow your cells to get better at utilizing carbs. Sounds crazy because protein is protein, not a carb. But over the long term, if you want to repair your metabolism, protein's going to be key. And now we need to have less fear of fiber. Okay, we used to think that fiber on a ketogenic diet was an unnecessary risk. You don't need fiber on a keto diet a whole lot because the bowels are working just fine with low fiber and it's not that big of a deal. Okay, well now we're understanding that fiber does way more than just make you poop in the morning. Fiber is what drives a lot of cellular processes, including the upregulation of PPAR-alpha. Now, PPAR-alpha is a nuclear receptor protein that conditions our cells to be good at using fats. When we're doing keto, we want our body to use fats well, right? Well, then we want our cells to be able to adopt that process. We want PPAR-alpha to be elevated. Turns out, higher levels of fiber can increase this. Also, studies are demonstrating that fiber alone can improve insulin resistance. So I know it's a little bit of a risk that you might get too many carbs if you have fiber, but it's worth the risk. Before, it wasn't worth the risk. We used to say, yeah, maybe keep the fiber kind of low because we don't know if those carbs count or not. Now we say we don't care if those carbs count or not. If it's fiber, it's probably not impacting ketogenesis, formation of ketones, and it's probably helping you out metabolically long term. The next one is being able to effectively cycle out of ketosis every 4 to 6 months if you must. Okay, now why do I say if you must? Well, because a lot of people feel really good and they don't want to cycle out of it. And if you're feeling great, I don't recommend you cycle out, but I do want you to consider one very important thing. Your body's a little bit of a one-trick pony. And what that means is it's going to get really good at utilizing one fuel. For most of your life, you probably were a carb burner and your body got really good at using carbs. And then you switched over to using fats and your body had to kind of upregulate the process to get good at it. Well, the reverse happens when you do keto for a long time. And we're starting to see this data where people that do keto for 6, 12 months, 2 years, then they go back and have carbs and they lack the ability to process those carbs in the cell properly. If you occasionally dip your toe in the carbohydrate pool by not having sugar but having some fruit, by having concentrated amounts of carbs in good fashion in very distinct forms, then you're actually going to allow your body to maintain the ability to use carbs. So every 4 or 6 months, take a couple weeks off, even if it means you don't feel tremendous. You go right back to keto. You're not going back to the well forever. So I want to recap everything here. So you've got a simple playbook on how to go about your newer ketogenic diet that is approved by the American Diabetic Association as far as like a low carb diet being recognized, as far as really people not demonizing keto anymore, especially when it's done like this. You want most of your fats to come from things like olive oil, avocado oil, the natural saturated fat that's going to come from meats, not coming from things like as much palm oil, maybe not as much coconut oil as we used to think. Maybe we want to shift it more towards ghee. Okay, so we want things like ghee, we want things like olive oil, we want things like macadamia nut oil, we want things like walnut oil occasionally, but we really want to keep it those good monounsaturated fats as much as possible. Okay, polyunsaturated fats coming from nuts and fish and things like that are a little bit less than what we used to think. We used to say, go high fish oil all the time. Now we're thinking like, no, use fish as a protein source. Get your omega-3s from a little bit of fish. Don't worry about it quite so much. Maybe don't go crazy on the omega-3 content. Focus on the monounsaturated to drive up HDL and take care of insulin sensitivity. Okay, so that's where your fats are gonna land. Now with your proteins, again, to recap, I think eggs should be your priority. You're gonna obviously get fats from eggs too. Poultry, fish, things like sardines, things like mackerel, that's gonna be great. Leaner cuts of red meat for the heme iron, but maybe without the concentration of fat that's gonna throw your calories out the window, who knows, right? We wanna focus a little bit more on dairy. The dairy fat seems to not be as bad as we once thought. Okay, maybe we're getting some benefit there, but focus on the hard aged cheeses, the Parmesans, the Pecorino Romano, even the fetas, the sheep fetas, the goat cheese, okay, the various kinds of Parmesans and Romanos, the aged Goudas, these things, although a little bit pricier and a little bit bitier, if that's a word, with the taste, that's gonna be the best kind that you wanna go for. You wanna have eggs, you wanna have steak and eggs kind of breakfast, higher calorie breakfasts, and taper off as the day goes on. You wanna increase the veggies and get the polyphenols in. You wanna increase the green tea and get the polyphenols in. Focus, polyphenols, polyphenols, polyphenols. You don't wanna be afraid of 15, 20 grams of carbohydrates from good quality berries if it's getting you the polyphenols, even if it knocks you out of ketosis for 5 seconds. We're not chasing ketones, we're chasing results. So let's look at this return of keto with fresh eyes, through rose-colored glasses, and get excited about it again. Because keto went away because people demonized it and people got tired of fighting it. But now we're in line with the mainstream a little bit more, and we can understand the best of both worlds. I'll see you tomorrow.